Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Sentient Strategy: How to Create Market-Dominating Strategies in Turbulent Economies by Alan Weiss, narrated by Tom Parks. Publisher's Note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to figures present in the print and ebook formats of the book. Introduction. Ask 5 people for a definition of strategy, and you'll receive 7 different responses. The dictionary defines it as a plan of action or policy designed to achieve a major or overall aim. That's not exactly helpful either. In fact, it confuses tactics with strategy, which is a mortal business sin. A plan of action to achieve a major aim might include raising prices or decreasing expenses, both of which are tactics, not strategies. We hear of the term in grandiose pronouncements, such as our new human resources strategy. But that intent had better be in support of the corporate strategy, or it's useless. What's really meant is the steps human resources will take to help implement the organizational strategy. And then there are approaches such as SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, which are so simplistic and flawed that they wouldn't suit a kid's lemonade stand on the street in terms of growth. But a great many consultants seeking a quick buck and a great many executives seeking a quick fix fall for these ineffective shortcuts. There is also the mantra of values, vision, mission, which I'll dispel in the book as a rather useless meme. Again, it's an easy phrase that substitutes for hard work. My favorite definition is one I learned from Ben Trago, co-founder of Kepner Trago, where I worked in the 1970s learning the consulting profession. He said that strategy is a framework within which decisions are made that establish the nature and direction of the business. That is simple and elegant and memorable, and does not allow for tactics, the how, but focuses on strategy, the what. I was prompted to write this book when I began to hear the horrid sounds of nails scraping on a blackboard in the form of statements such as return to normal or the new normal. The word normal means typical or average, and that's not something that I, or I hope you, aspire to become. In fact, what we're facing post-pandemic is no normal. There are new realities we have to face, but we'd better understand that disruption, volatility, and turmoil are not singular occurrences nor merely threats to guard against. They are part of the new realities and must be used strategically as offensive weapons of market leadership. Thus, I developed Sentient Strategy, which is a contrarian approach that is nonetheless congruent with Ben Trago's framework described previously. Taking into account the ongoing changes in technology, globalism, economics, social justice demands, demographics, and new demands for speed, I've tried to codify a self-awareness, sentience, in strategy formulation and implementation. Future strategy is about clarity, not complexity. It's not about charts and graphs. It's about beliefs and contributions to customers, the community, employees, and investors. As I created my own practice in the 80s and beyond, it was commonplace for executives to spend weeks in retreats to create a strategy over months that looked a decade into the future. Today, that's the equivalent of using a magic 8-ball, astrology, or a crystal ball. Sentient strategy is based on personal and business self-awareness, intended to create a strategy in as little as a day, with the intent of looking only 12 to 18 months into the future. It is meant to be an organic framework that leads and influences every business discussion and assigns accountability to executing the strategy and modifying it to people with the ability and authority to do so. In other words, it's not about a binder on a shelf or a file on a computer. It's about realizing your mission as an organizer or your calling as a professional. My own calling has long been to maximize the ability of my clients to contribute to society. Keep listening and continue the journey with me. Alan Weiss, East Greenwich, Rhode Island, November 2022. Chapter 1. The Glacial Pace of Strategic Change. We've equated strategy with hard work, with the need for expert outsiders who earn their money by taking a long time with a lot of people to provide air cover for executives with their boards. We insist on having all the information, while that's patently impossible at the rate of today's change. What we lack are knowledge and wisdom. The terminal moraine of this glacier has been the demise of Sears, Toys R Us, GE, broadcast television, and other organizations which went as far as they could with ossified techniques and then retreated or collapsed. Origins. The term strategy is derived from the Greek strategos, which means general, but it wasn't applied in Greek commerce or common language. The discipline of strategy is from the 1950s, and aside from the famed Peter Drucker, was promulgated by people such as Philip Selznick, Alfred Chandler, Igor Ansoff, and Bruce Henderson. Militarily, it was used in discussions as early as the late 18th century, but it was not applied to business until the mid-20th century. The chicken/egg question answered. Which came first, strategy or action? Did we begin with long-term goals or short-term efforts? Unequivocally, it was the latter, because people, and plants and animals, need to eat. From the time of primitive animals, there was competition for food. The worst competition was between those organisms which were identical in that their food sources would be the same. The competition was studied and researched in 1934 by Professor G.F. Gauss in Moscow. Different species pursued different food supplies, but identical animals pursued the same supply. Thus, competition between life forms predates strategy. The same dynamic applied and applies to humans. Millennia later, this is still true. So how is it that there are millions of species today that are not constantly displacing others? The answer lies in diversity. The more abundant the environment, the more opportunity for an organism to achieve a specialty and flourish. Today, there is an axiom that competition opens markets and does not foreclose them. So, Burger King builds its stores down the block from McDonald's because everyone knows that people are going there to buy burgers, or what passes for burgers. Neither the early primitive animals nor Burger King were and are engaged in strategy for such survival. But you probably do know who recognized this and documented it long before drive-through: Charles Darwin. We're talking about natural selection and survival of the fittest. Today, people refer to social Darwinism and business Darwinism, and with good reason. But let's mix in another variable, that of luck, or unanticipated change. The dinosaurs thrived for about 129 million years, and the Tyrannosaurus lived closer to our time today than to the first of its ancestor dinosaurs. They were fabulously successful and diverse, and if a piece of space junk hadn't hit the Yucatan, we'd all be reptiles today. And the birds, of course, confirmed as their descendants, are still with us. As I write this, there is a championship series in the National Basketball Association. And, like any championship, whether one and done or a 7-game series, the outcome mostly depends on who has the hot hand at the decisive moments. A player may score 40 points in one game and 12 the next. The difference isn't really the coaching or the defensive maneuvers, but whether or not Michael Jordan, or Sandy Koufax, or Venus Williams or Tom Brady was having a banner day. In business, these issues, among others, dictate luck or chance. Public perception, the fear or lack of fear of a new disease, war, or video game. Normative pressure. When the hula hoop was introduced in the 1950s, about 120 million were sold. But try to find people using one today. Accidents. It's claimed that everything from Velcro to superglue and Coca-Cola to the traction of running shoe soles was discovered by happenstance. Sloth. People fail to see obvious trends and patterns through complacency or poor critical thinking skills. While the Japanese photo companies were hiring IT experts for electronic photography, Kodak was still hiring chemists for its emulsions until its ouster from the film market. Adaptation is a key. Just as birds with various length beaks could thrive in particular environments, organizations with differing shipping methods or accounting practices could thrive, while others did not. For many years, I was a consultant with Merck, the pharmaceutical giant, at one point named America's most admired company 5 years in a row in the Fortune magazine poll. It had the most highly respected sales force in the business. But when the regulatory and social environment changed, for example, pharma companies could no longer wine and dine doctors in the Bahamas or wherever, Merck didn't anticipate the change. Instead of selling to medical people, for whom the sales force was adept at pointing out efficacy of drugs, they were now selling to the procurement people down in the basement, who cared only about cost. Merck and other companies had to make major changes to its sales force and selling techniques. Sentience. When differing entities compete for the same resources, one will eventually be more effective and subordinate or eliminate the other. What enables strategy? I've noted in my consulting work over the years that we deal in 3 common realms, hardly a breakthrough concept. Past. Something occurred that presents us with a problem today, or a lesson learned, or some kind of emotional baggage, such as something our mother told us 40 years ago. This is commonly called problem-solving in business if we feel we need to make a correction today. We use remembrance, memory, to deal with this, as well as research and fact-checking. Memory, of course, is often inaccurate, and even research can't always turn up valid answers and is sometimes plainly wrong. Just think about the evolution of COVID. Present. We need to make a decision in the here and now. We have options to consider, risks to weigh, and usually others who are also impacted by what we decide. We use perception of our environment and circumstances to help guide our decision-making. Perceptions, of course, vary from person to person and even day to day. They are fickle as well as very personal. Future. We need to implement a plan and protect it, either with the aim of avoiding future problems or launching innovative initiatives and taking new paths. We use our imagination to forecast our futures, as well as what trends and patterns we feel we can foresee and justify. If you consider memory, perception, and imagination to be the 3 drivers of these business dynamics, past, present, and future, what do you believe we're weakest at doing? Unequivocally, I think it's imagination. Despite those who would prefer to be on a more profound basis, imagination enables strategy if there is a rational process for its inclusion. Competition may open markets, but it also can foreclose on the opportunities of others, with winners, losers, and sometimes ties. VHS and Betamax, Airbus and Boeing, Nike and Reebok, Marvel Comics and DC Comics, Coke and Pepsi. But let's return to identical competition for the same resources. Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks both sell coffee and breakfast items, but they are not competing for the same customers. In a now famous study, loyal customers of each were given free coffee if they patronized the other store. The idea was to determine how many would desert for the other brand. The answer was none. 0. Nadia. The Duncan people thought they had invaded someone else's living room and were being shunned, while the Starbucks people were stunned at the poor furnishings and lack of oat-flavored non-gluten double-shot Trentas. I exaggerate, but only minimally. As a result, the researchers dubbed the two groups tribes and realized that each had its own market that was safe and wasn't about to steal from the other's market. Growth would have to come from unaffiliated coffee addicts. True competitors with identical markets will fight until one is vanquished in most cases. This proves the case made earlier that two or more entities seeking identical customers, food sources, cannot both thrive, at least to the same degree. Coke and Pepsi drinkers are different people, and they'll only cross over when the establishment they're in doesn't have their brand. However, Beta fell to VHS, and Kodak fell to Fuji. Sentience. It's best to identify your ideal market, your ideal buyer, and seek 100% of that market rather than try to embrace wider markets against entrenched competition which already owns that market. Distinctions with a difference. We mistakenly think of auto companies in competition with each other, but Toyota, Ford, Bentley, Porsche, and Mercedes are in the same basic business, road transportation, but they have differentiated their products so as to appeal to certain markets. My contention is that the NSX from Honda was a fine sports car and among the best at its price, but people were not ready to buy a Japanese sports car. That particular buyer associated sports cars with Germany and Italy. Remember, perception occurs in the present and can be both fickle and subject to great normative pressure. Advertising can overcome some image shortcomings, but not deeply held beliefs. It's clear that competitors can exist and thrive if they provide sufficient appeal to their desired market. The highly successful talk radio hosts, from Rush Limbaugh to Howard Stern and Don Imus, were not and are not seeking to recruit new listeners from other sources. Rather, they know exactly who their buyers are and strive mightily to continue to appeal to them. That's also why late-night TV shows don't have huge sways in viewership once established. No one successfully competed with Johnny Carson for 30 years of his reign. Another channel would have been just as successful, showing old movies or sports reruns, pursuing an entirely different market than putting up their own talking head. Competitors aren't generalized, and that Ford is not a competitor for Bentley, and the Four Seasons hotels are not competing with Sheraton. But the Four Seasons are competing with the Peninsula hotels, and Ford is competing with Toyota. Thus, the distinctions created between an organization and its closest competitors will help decide the Darwinian wars. You win, someone else loses. Let me say at this point, from my experience coaching entrepreneurs and solo practitioners for a large part of my career, that independence alone can create a distinct competitive advantage, because you're selling yourself. The issue in this case is one of branding, because you need to be far different from the person down the block or across the street, or, in a now remote world, from another country. You can see in Figure 1.1, which can be found in the print and ebook versions of this book, that not everyone is an ideal buyer. And unless the strategy is accurate and in place for the planned evolution of the organization, huge amounts of time, energy, money, and repute can be wasted. As opposed to the usual bell curve, this chart shows the third dimension, depth. The point is that we are better off with the small slice of ideal buyers than the huge portion of unlikely buyers. Hang tens comes from the more aggressive surfboarders who gain better control and more exciting runs by hanging their feet off the forward end of the board. Serial developers are sometimes called early adapters, and they are likely to try new things more readily. No matter how you identify your ideal buyers on the right side, it is they to whom you must appeal and consequently demonstrate proper differentiation. As you listen to this, you have a current market, whether you are for-profit, non-profit, academic, governmental, entertainment, recreation, or whatever. That market is yours, and a key premise is to keep it. Let's stipulate that growth depends on both sustaining our current ideal market and expanding it. That way, growth isn't simply replacing loss. The aforementioned Peter Drucker, who is often called the inventor of modern strategy because of his work at GM in the 1950s with Alfred P. Sloan, observed that an organization is not successful merely by dint of perpetuating the species, like a tulip or a cheetah, but is successful by its contribution to the environment. He wasn't thinking green here so much as community. The stereotypical vision, mission, values mantra of strategic thinking is really about mission in terms of importance. Mission is the raison d'être. Merck's mission was to bring the greatest scientific advances to the greatest areas of human health need. People who worked for Merck didn't go there to get rich, although some did. They went there because they believed in the mission. When one of Merck's failed medicines accidentally turned out to be a cure for African river blindness, the leading cause of death in Africa at the time, the company donated it at no charge, and the disease was eradicated. That was the mission at work. Any organization has to have a singular distinction, an advantageous position, to win the Darwinian battle. Tesla is attempting that with its innovative, profound pursuit of electric vehicles. Will its advanced start be enough to fight off the larger, wealthy car makers when they have produced their entries belatedly? At this writing, it's still anyone's game, especially as Tesla battles the errors and imperfections of any leading-edge technology. FedEx gained a huge competitive advantage in the U.S. with its hub-and-spoke delivery innovation. They then parlayed this into a global advantage, even carrying the U.S. mail at times. UPS was late to the overnight game, and today one still hears, "Let's FedEx this," and not "Let's UPS this." DHL, which was an existing global competitor, had to leave the lucrative U.S. market because of FedEx's great advantage. Remember, absolutely guaranteed to get there the next day? These are very powerful differentiators. Recently, during the pandemic, American Express's long-term mantra, "Don't leave home without it," seemed in trouble, since no one was leaving home at all. But a simple change made all the difference. "Don't live life without it," which encouraged the card's use when ordering remotely. Singular advantages have to evolve per the Darwinian rules. Sentience. Strategy is the deliberate attempt to plan for successful growth of the organization by identifying appropriate markets and distinguishing relevant benefits to attract and sustain those buyers. How large is your market? We've established that you own 100% of what you now own. Surprised? But what can you own? Let's suppose that Irwin Innovation created a hydrogen-powered car called, not surprisingly, the Irwin. It would have, at the time, 100% of the hydrogen car market, but a smaller percentage of the non-internal combustion engine auto market, a smaller percentage of the auto market, and a tiny percentage of the overall transportation market. The Irwin would represent an amoeba-sized portion of the GDP, which is unfortunate, since the car is named after my favorite uncle. Overall market share is not as important unless the lines of demarcation among markets are clearly drawn. You want to move into identical competitor spaces and absorb that market. The leverage isn't in low price, but in high margin. The price for a new Ford F-150 in 2022, America's top-selling vehicle, is about $47,000, and the margin is about 21%. In 1964, the original Mustang sold for about $3,370, and its profit margin was about 65%. That was far greater than Ford's top-of-the-line Lincoln at the time. We began by talking about the competition among identical species for survival and the ensuing competitive strategies. These rivalries applied to business are much more recent. Strategy, by most definitions today, would include the organization's vision or future state, the mission, as described previously, the values that drive the organization's culture, the motive force driving major decisions, competitive analysis, opportunities to be created and or exploited, assessment of trends in politics, finance, social mores, etc., risk management, implementation, and accountabilities. Some of these appear to be more by habit than utility, by the way. The inescapable recitation of values seems mindless, and the fourth one from the top on the walls is always respect our employees, while you see employees metaphorically beaten in the halls. I also love highest ethical conduct. Too bad I was looking for a company with lower ethical conduct. I would responsibly add to or supplant some of the previously mentioned with consciousness of the impact of organizational actions, awareness of the environment in which the entity operates. In games as disparate as chess and racquetball, it is vital to control the center of the board or of the court. The ability to effectively do so will result in victory most of the time. Thus, strategy is also about control of the center of the marketplace, which diminishes the randomness of the hot hand we discussed earlier. The reason that I've cited Darwin so much is that we are talking about a food chain based on survival of the fittest. The undercurrents of this are fascinating. In her book, Leadership and the New Science, Margaret Wheatley posited that consciousness is a factor of the ability and speed to process information. Thus, she concludes, a dog has higher consciousness than a snail because a dog can process information faster than a snail. That immediately led me to realize that some people process information a lot faster than others, and thus have a higher degree of consciousness. I could make a case that IQ isn't a proper measure of ability, or if it is, then it's really a measure of processing information rapidly. This is why some people constantly crush standardized tests more often and thoroughly than others. This isn't so much a factor of intelligence as it is of levels of consciousness. The same holds true for organizations. Let me conclude this chapter by pointing out that relatively recently we've seen the demise of giants in business and industry that would have been thought impossible not long ago. GE, Toys R Us, Sears, broadcast television, movie theaters, Polaroid, Blockbuster, Borders, Pan Am, Pets.com, Compaq, BlackBerry, Yahoo, Xerox. Turbulent times tend to exacerbate both strengths and weaknesses. The strong become stronger, and the weak perish. The organizations mentioned previously, and hundreds of others like them globally, have failed because they've been victims of the harsh Darwinian dynamics discussed here. They have misunderstood markets, focused on the wrong market shares, and have employed strategy as a superficial exercise, calling in large consulting firms to provide the air cover with the board. Look, we hired the best. Consider this example. Sears Roebuck was a highly innovative, aggressive company. It placed catalogs on the earliest transcontinental trains after the Civil War, and incented customers to buy everything from food to homes, tools to recreation, from across the country. The orders were placed on the railroads and the goods were delivered by them. There are still a few of the old Sears prefab houses extant today, purchased long ago in this manner. If you don't think the strategic considerations in this chapter are important, answer these questions for me. Why didn't Sears naturally morph into Amazon? Wouldn't that have been the natural evolutionary trail? Why did Amazon instead arise from nowhere on the basis of Jeff Bezos's imagination? Why did no one predict the Internet? Continue listening. In the
Sample complete. Ready to continue?